Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into one of the most violent, chaotic, and honestly world-shaping periods in history, the English Reformation. We're going to see how state religion acted like a giant pendulum, just swinging wildly back and forth between Roman Catholicism and Protestantism, and how that relentless swinging completely reshaped the modern world as we know it. So here's a wild question for us to tackle today. What on earth connects the messy marital troubles of King Henry VIII in the early 1500s to the Pilgrims founding America nearly a century later? It seems like a massive leap, right? Well, as we follow the historical timeline, you'll see exactly how a single political decision set off this massive chain reaction of persecution, theological shifts, and ultimately desperate migrations. But hold on, before we get to the famous monarchs, we've got to look at the groundwork. Way before big names like Luther or Calvin, a sort of pre-Reformation was already brewing in England. The catalyst for this? John Wycliffe. He was a very vocal critic of the church's practices and actually translated the Bible. He earned this beautiful title, the Morning Star of the Reformation. Just like the morning star appears in the dark, right before the dawn, Wycliffe's protest movement signaled that a massive shift in the religious landscape was on the horizon. To give you a sense of our historical momentum, we are about to rapidly cover a totally chaotic century. We're going from a king's dramatic political power grab in 1534, right through decades of back-and-forth religious violence, see stability temporarily achieved in 1558, and ultimately witness how that very stability forced strict religious believers to flee across the ocean in 1620 and 1628. Strap in, because it is a rapid, intense, historical ride. Now, the real motivation behind the start of the English Reformation is actually pretty ironic. When Henry VIII officially broke away from the Roman Catholic Church in 1534 and just declared himself the head of the Church of England, it wasn't because he had some profound theological awakening. No, it was entirely political. He wanted a divorce from his wife so he could marry Anne Boleyn, and the Italian Pope flat out refused to grant it. So, fueled by English ego and political necessity, Henry severed ties with Rome. But here's the kicker. Personally, his theology remained deeply traditional and Catholic. And even though Henry personally stayed theologically Catholic, he violently swung the pendulum of everyday English life. How'd he do it? By destroying the external trappings of Catholicism. He ordered the absolute leveling of England's monasteries. This was a staggering cultural tragedy. I mean, these monasteries were beautiful centers of art, biblical translation, and medieval culture. So while the theology itself hadn't officially changed much yet, the visual and cultural landscape of England was effectively wiped clean, setting the stage for true reform. But the true reform, that arrived with Henry's son, King Edward VI. Under his super brief reign, that pendulum swung hard toward a much stricter, reform-focused style of Protestantism known as Calvinism. His advisors brought in massive changes to the everyday church experience. Images were stripped from the churches. The Mass was translated from Latin into English so everyday people could actually understand it. Priests were finally allowed to marry, and everyday churchgoers were allowed to drink the communion wine, not just eat the bread. These were radical, foundational shifts that deeply Protestantized the English church. All right, here comes the violent snapback. Edward dies young, and Queen Mary takes the throne. She's the daughter of Henry VIII and his first Catholic wife, and she was fiercely Roman Catholic and completely intolerant of the Reformation. She decided the only way to restore Catholicism in England was through aggressive, lethal force. Under her reign, an estimated 200 Protestants were burned at the stake. She went right after the prominent leaders who had driven Edward's reforms. Two of the most famous figures to face the flames under her brutal reign were Nicholas Ridley, a brilliant Oxford scholar, and Hugh Latimer, a really charismatic, popular preacher. They were tied to the stake in Oxford, which is a tragic event that is actually still memorialized in the city's streets today. And their story perfectly captures the sheer power of martyrdom. As the fires were lit, Latimer turned to his friend with these absolutely unforgettable final words. He said, "We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as I trust shall never be put out." He was essentially telling Ridley that their deaths were lighting a candle of faith that Mary could never extinguish. And you know what? He was right. Mary's extreme, violent tactics accidentally ignited a fire of public sympathy that ultimately strengthened the Protestant resolve far more than it ever suppressed it. So Mary dies, Queen Elizabeth I takes the throne, and she finally stops this wild swinging of the pendulum. She tactfully carved out a permanent middle ground for the English Reformation. She replaced Catholic leaders, solidified the church's beliefs in a document called the 39 Articles, and unified worship through the Book of Common Prayer. And notably, she didn't call herself the head of the church like her dad did. Instead, she went with supreme governor. It was a subtle but incredibly clever political loophole that actually still dictates how the Archbishop of Canterbury is appointed today. Elizabeth masterfully defended this newly stabilized Anglican church by giving it three foundational pillars. She claimed it was scriptural, traditional, meaning Catholic in the Orthodox sense of the early church, and reasonable. It was a classic attempt to keep everybody happy. But, as happens so often with compromises, it ended up making the strict reformers furiously unhappy. They felt this Anglican middle ground was still way too Catholic in its practices. Now, this brings us to a massive historical pivot point. Early on in the Reformation, with folks like Luther, the big debate was all about personal salvation. But now, over in England, the central theological debate shifted entirely to something called ecclesiology, which is just the study of the church itself. People weren't just arguing about salvation anymore. They were furiously debating power dynamics, who should be in charge, how should communities be run. And right at the core of that debate was church polity, basically how the church is governed. Strict reformers, totally driven by the belief that the Bible alone should dictate structure, looked at the whole Anglican hierarchy. They looked at the archbishops, the priests, the robes, the incense, and said, yeah, we don't see any of this in the Bible. They vehemently rejected the top-down hierarchy set up by the monarchy and demanded a simpler structure run directly by the congregation. They were essentially asking for early forms of grassroots democracy in a world that was completely ruled by kings. So, let's look at this ideological split, because this is where the story of America really starts to build. The reformers who hated that Anglican hierarchy split into two distinct camps. The Puritans believed they should stay inside the Anglican Church and work to purify it from the inside out, using Parliament to change things. On the flip side, you had the Separatists, also known as Independents. They committed what was considered massive heresy at the time. They basically said the church was unfixable, and they abandoned the institution completely to form their own independent, simplified groups. But here's the catch. You couldn't exactly just go start your own independent church in 16th century England without risking your life. Early independent leaders like Robert Brown and Robert Harrison were relentlessly hounded out of the country. Fearing the stake, these religious exiles desperately fled across the English Channel to the Netherlands. At the time, it was one of the very few havens in the world that actually offered religious refuge to groups fleeing persecution. But the Netherlands? That was really just a temporary fix. These separatists wanted to raise their kids in an English culture, but they wanted to be completely free from the English state church. So they made a monumental choice. In 1620, pushed by that intense religious persecution, they boarded a tiny, cramped ship called the Mayflower. They made a treacherous, deadly voyage across the Atlantic to establish a completely independent society at Plymouth Rock. Of course, we know them today as the Pilgrims. Taking their cues strictly from the Bible instead of a king, they built a brand new congregational society over in the Americas. They were led by guys like William Brewster, who took the biblical title of elder as their spiritual guide, and William Bradford, who stepped up as the political governor. They essentially built the exact kind of decentralized, independent church polity that they had been begging for back in England. And you know what? The separatists weren't the only ones packing their bags. Remember those Puritans, the folks who wanted to stay in the Church of England and fix it from the inside? Well, by 1628, they realized the political tide was against them too. A massive wave of Puritan immigration hit the shores of the New World. Leaders like John Cotton and Richard Mather brought their strict Calvinist visions across the Atlantic, firmly rooting their theology right into the absolute bedrock of Boston, ideas that would go on to heavily influence American culture. Which brings us right back to our opening thought. We've just seen how extreme shifts in state religion, that massive pendulum swinging from Henry to Edward to Mary to Elizabeth, literally drove the founding of an entirely new nation across the globe. It's an absolutely powerful reminder of how ideas shape reality. So, I'll leave you with this. When the pendulums of our modern beliefs and political systems swing violently today, who gets caught in the middle, and what new worlds are currently being built by those looking for a way out? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I'll catch you next time.